Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Tonight, we'll bring you news from another theatre of war, the Pacific. American and Chinese navies came face to face. The Chinese claim to have driven away an American destroyer. They say it was engaged in illegal activity. The Americans have refuted that claim, but this is not an isolated incident. This has become a pattern, with both sides marking their territory and expanding their access in what could well be the next theatre of war. We'll bring you the details. Also, a story on the US Federal Reserve. They've hiked interest rates again, as American lawmakers say that the regulator needs regulation. They're bringing in a new bill. Ajay Banga is America's nominee to lead the World Bank, but the Chinese may be throwing a spanner in the works. We'll tell you why that is happening. And Moderna has jacked up the prices of its COVID vaccine by 400%. All those stories and more, the headlines first. Russia launches deadly strikes across Ukraine. Missiles and drones rain on cities close to the capital, Kiev. The strikes came just hours after Chinese President Xi Jinping wrapped up his visit to Moscow. Israeli minister's "No Palestinians" remark sparks outrage in the Arab world. Jordan votes to expel Israel's ambassador to Amman in protest. The minister made the remark at an event which showed a map of Israel, including all of Palestine and Jordan. Indian opposition leader Rahul Gandhi sentenced to 2 years in jail. The Congress leader has been found guilty in a 2019 defamation case over Prime Minister Modi's surname. Rahul Gandhi has been given 30 days to appeal this decision. Strikes continue in France as the standoff deepens. Roads blocked, train services disrupted amid nationwide protests, but a defiant President Macron refuses to withdraw his controversial pension reforms. And the world's first 3D printed rocket is launched successfully in its third attempt, but it fails to reach orbit due to an engine failure. While the world is caught up with Ukraine, another battlefield is being prepared. Tensions are rising in the Pacific. China has driven away an American destroyer. Beijing says it illegally entered the South China Sea. The US is setting up new military bases in the Philippines, very close to Taiwan. China is lapping up port projects in Pacific Islands. Both sides are marking their territory and setting up military facilities. The US and China are preparing for war, a war over Taiwan. It won't happen tomorrow, but the US says it will happen. And the preparation is on war footing. Today, the navies of the US and China came face to face. An American destroyer entered the waters around the Paracel Islands. This is in the South China Sea. The Paracel Islands is an archipelago. It is a group of about 130 small coral islands and reefs. What was the US warship doing there? The US Navy said it was on a routine operation. But China contests this claim. It says the US destroyer entered the waters illegally and that China has driven away the American warship. The Americans, of course, have not agreed to this claim. They say there was nothing illegal about their activities in this region. But the South China Sea, we know, remains a major flashpoint, and the Americans are expanding their access here. They've struck a deal with the Philippines. This is to expand their military presence in North Philippines. Remember, the US already has bases in this country. Now they'll get more access. Reports say 3 military sites are being considered. 2 are in northern Philippines, and these are very close to Taiwan. The third site is closer to the South China Sea. So the gains for the US are obvious. It will increase its military presence in this region. It can mobilize in larger numbers in the event of a war. As for the Chinese, their response to the deal is on expected lines.
China has always believed that defense and security cooperation between countries should be conducive to regional peace and stability and should not target or harm the interests of third parties. The US side has been strengthening its military deployment in the region out of its own selfish interests and with a zero-sum mindset.
Beijing is responding not just with words. The PLA has stepped up activities around Taiwan. Almost every day it sends warships and warplanes. And they don't do very much. They just come close to the island of Taiwan. They register their presence, stick around just long enough for Taiwan to take notice, and then they leave. These are intimidation tactics. Earlier this week, Taiwan detected 10 Chinese military aircraft and 2 naval vessels. So far this month, Beijing has sent at least 292 military aircraft and 76 naval vessels. And how does Taiwan respond to this? With military drills of its own. The latest ones happened in North Taiwan. Military tanks were spotted rolling down the streets there. They were conducting what are called anti-landing exercises, specifically designed to deter a potential Chinese invasion. But why is the situation escalating now? Because the Taiwanese president is traveling to the US.
The trip will kick off on March 29th with a transit through New York on the same day. After this, she will continue her journey to Guatemala and Belize to conduct exchanges with the two allied nations. On the trip back, there will be a stopover in Los Angeles.
She will make 2 stops in the US and also visit Guatemala and Belize. These are diplomatic allies of Taiwan. In the US, President Tsai could meet Kevin McCarthy, the current US House Speaker. Washington is trying to paint this as an unofficial stop.
There's no reason for China to overreact. Heck, there's no reason for them to react. I mean, this is something that, as I said, is commonplace and has happened before, will likely happen again. It's personal, it's unofficial. There should be no reason for Beijing to react in any way to this.
China is not convinced, though. It is shooting warnings to both Washington and Taipei.
We again warn the Taiwan authorities that there is no way out for Taiwan independence. And any illusions about attempts to collude with external forces to seek independence and provocation is doomed to fail.
Such unofficial visits have happened in the past too, and this one will go ahead in all likelihood. So Beijing is throwing a tantrum, conducting more military drills. The US intelligence community says it is also preparing for war. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has backed their assessment. He says China will invade Taiwan before 2027, and the fate of the Ukraine war will guide China's strategy. China is tracking the conflict and taking lessons from it.
I think if China is looking at this, and they are looking at it very carefully, they will draw lessons for how the world comes together or doesn't.
There are good reasons to be worried. The conflict in the South China Sea is very much alive. China claims almost the entire sea. 5 other countries have competing claims, sometimes overlapping claims. These are Vietnam, the Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Brunei. The South China Sea is vital for the global economy. It has great economic and geostrategic importance. 1/3 of the world's maritime shipping passes through here. The ships carry over $3 trillion worth of goods. A war in this region would spell disaster for all sides, but none wants to pull back. And as the Americans make inroads here, with more warships and military bases, the Chinese too are expanding their access. China has won a major contract in the Solomon Islands. The deal is to upgrade an international port. It is in Honiara, the capital of the Solomons. The project is funded by the Asian Development Bank. It will be executed by a Chinese state-owned company. And this has raised some hackles. Last year, Beijing and Honiara sealed a security pact. Now China is upgrading a port there. The West fears that China will try to build a naval base in the Solomons. So will this port deal lead to a military base for the Chinese? It's too early to say. Plus, when you have China in the picture, all bets are off. Now let's talk about an institution in trouble. The US Central Bank, better known as the Federal Reserve. US lawmakers are raising some tough questions. Is the Fed responsible for the banking crisis? Did it mishandle the situation? Did it fail to do its job? The questions are growing louder, especially after yesterday's announcement. The Federal Reserve has decided to hike interest rates again.
At today's meeting, the committee raised the target range for the federal funds rate by a 1/4 percentage point. The process of getting inflation back down to 2% has a long way to go and is likely to be bumpy.
The banks will be fine. Let's focus on fighting the inflation. That's the message from the US Fed. Its aggressive rate hikes have created a perfect storm. It led to the collapse of 2 American banks, and that in turn has caused turmoil in global financial stocks. Yesterday, the US Fed had an opportunity to course correct. to restore the faith of depositors and investors in American banks. But the Fed chose to hike rates again. It says inflation is stubborn and must be dealt with first. So is America's central bank ignoring the larger crisis? The Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, offered a weak defense. For the failed banks, he blamed their managers. He said they are the ones who, quote-unquote, failed badly, and that the rest of the banking system was strong. He also downplayed worries about the financial system. So bank managers must take the blame, but what about the role of the Federal Reserve itself? Powell says a review is underway, an internal review.
We're undertaking a thorough internal review that will identify where we can strengthen supervision and regulation.
For some lawmakers, that explanation is not good enough. They want a probe against the U.S. Federal Reserve. Last week, a lawmaker asked Powell to step aside until a review into the bank failures was complete.
For this review to have any credibility at all, Chair Powell has to recuse himself. He is the one who not only presided over the Fed, that's the only way we can have some confidence in it.
That's Elizabeth Warren. She's a Democrat and perhaps the most vocal critic of the Fed in this crisis. She has now pushed a bill. It calls for more oversight. Warren has teamed up with a Republican for this bill. His name is Rick Scott. And what does the bill say? Right now, the U.S. Fed has an internal watchdog, the Internal Inspector General. It is responsible for oversight. It reports directly to the Federal Reserve Board. Now, if passed, the bill would replace this mechanism. The central bank will get an external watchdog, one that is appointed by the U.S. president. The fate of the bill is yet to be decided, but the scrutiny against the Fed will only intensify. Hearings are being planned in the U.S. Congress. Both the U.S. Senate and the House plan to look into the bank collapse. The hearings will begin next week. Remember, the collapse of 2 American banks came as a shock to the world. But was America's central bank also caught by surprise? Did they not see this coming? After all, this is the institution responsible for keeping an eye on banks. Powell says he was baffled by the collapse of the SVB, the Silicon Valley Bank, the first bank to fall in this crisis. Consider what he said, and I'm quoting, "The question we were all asking ourselves over that first weekend was, how did this happen? We are doing the review of supervision and regulation. My only interest is that we identify what went wrong here." And let me remind you, this is the chair of America's central bank talking. Clearly, he too was stumped by the collapse. But was the US Fed completely clueless? The answer is no. Fed officials were aware of the risks. They met earlier this year for 2 days, 31st of January and the 1st Feb. And what did they discuss? Vulnerabilities to financial stability. Concerns were expressed. Some officials discussed specific possibilities. These included runs on non-banking financial institutions and the impact of large unrealized losses in banks. So Fed officials were definitely in the know. And was the Fed chair part of this meeting? Reports say he did register his presence. Was he briefed about the vulnerabilities? What was Powell's next move? What actions did he take? Did he try to prevent the collapse, or did he just ignore the problems? The chair of the US Fed could face all of these questions once the hearings begin next week. Now let's talk about another bank, the World Bank. It is set to get a new president. Until recently, it was supposed to be a person of Indian origin nominated by the US president. But now China has come in the way. China says it could support someone else. Tonight we'll discuss why China has reservations about this and how it installs Chinese nationals to lead top global institutions. Does it bring leverage? Sure it does. Does India use this leverage with Indian origin leaders of global institutions? We're not so sure. This story begins with Ajay Banga, 63 years old, former CEO of MasterCard, and now the front runner for the post of World Bank chief. Until a few days back, it was a foregone conclusion. US President Biden had nominated him. His CV is rock solid. He led MasterCard for 12 years before retiring in 2021. He's also a champion of sustainable growth. Listen to what he said during a recent trip to Kenya.
My belief is that the going forward economy and growth cannot and should not be conducted in the same emissions-heavy way of the prior 30 years. We cannot afford it. Our children cannot afford it.
So Banga was the perfect fit to lead the World Bank. But now the world is not so sure, because China has entered the picture. China says it is, quote unquote, open to supporting other potential candidates based on merit, meaning it could back someone else. But why is China not keen on Ajay Banga? To answer that, we must understand World Bank politics. The World Bank is a shining example of US hegemony. It has always been headed by an American. Its president is technically chosen by 25 executive directors, but the process is opaque. And for some reason, an American always comes out as president. In that sense, Ajay Banga would not have been an exception. He's of Indian origin, but he's now an American. And China seems to be opposing that. So is this really a case of China pushing for a fair and open system? Far from it. This is proof of China's worsening relationship with the US. And talking about merit is a politically correct way of opposing the US. Also, Banga's nomination has not been without controversy. Germany, in particular, wanted a woman to head the World Bank. The institution has been around for 77 years. It has never had a woman president or a president of color, only white American men. So calls for diversity and inclusion, which are both admirable goals, could be weaponized by Beijing. It could be a way to wrest control of the World Bank from the US, because Beijing knows the value of having its people in charge. And China has been at it for years now. It has installed Chinese nationals at the helm of UN bodies. The list includes the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the International Civil Aviation Organization, the International Telecommunication Union, the Industrial Development Organization. They've all been led by Chinese citizens. Even the World Health Organization, it was led by Hong Kong's Margaret Chan. And China uses these appointments to push its agenda. If it's aiming for the World Bank next, Ajay Banga could be collateral damage. So now he's trying to rally support. He's traveling the world. He began the campaign with Africa, and now he's in India. He's meeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi and External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar. India has, of course, already backed Banga. He's in New Delhi to get a better idea of India's requirements from the World Bank. But the Indian capital is decked up as if to welcome a returning war hero. Which brings us to the other side of the story. You see, India always celebrates when its people do well abroad, even if they've renounced Indian citizenship. India does not allow dual citizenship. It is one of about 50 countries that do not allow dual citizenship. And so even if these achievers are not Indian anymore, they're still considered sons of the soil. And to be fair, they've done well for themselves. We only wish them the best. But our question is this: has India managed to leverage its people attaining high positions abroad? Remember when Rishi Sunak became the UK Prime Minister, Indians were thumping their chests saying that the Raj has struck back, that now an Indian was the Viceroy in London. Well, that Indian Viceroy has done little to protect Indian interests. Our High Commission came under attack. The Khalistanis are running riot. How did Rishi Sunak's Prime Ministership help India? The UK's vote bank politics trumped the Indian connection. And by the way, here's an interesting contrast. London has a Pakistan origin mayor. His name is Sadiq Khan. And under him, Ramzan lights were switched on in Piccadilly Circus for the first time ever. It has never happened before. Again, nothing wrong with having Ramzan lights in Piccadilly Circus, but here's a question that must be considered. As India backs Ajay Banga and cheers for the likes of Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, Indra Nooyi and Parag Agarwala, how does India benefit from their rise? Do they create more jobs in India? Do they push for policies favorable to India? If not, then why the ridiculous displays of pride? India needs to do more on the global stage. India needs to push forth its own citizens. Push for Indian nationals who have some skin in the game. And this may be one area where India can learn from its notorious northern neighbor. Meanwhile, coming back to the Khalistani attacks, they're very much on. Yesterday, there was another round of protests in London. Some 2,000 Khalistan supporters turned up at the Indian High Commission, also called the India House. And this protest lasted for almost 3 hours. There were tense moments. Protesters turned aggressive and violent. They threw water bottles and some flares. But this time, there was more security present. Scotland Yard had blockaded the area around and outside India House. Additional cops were deployed, including some on horseback. The UK Foreign Secretary said the Metropolitan Police is reviewing security at the Indian High Commission. And this comes right after India's tit-for-tat move. We told you about it yesterday. India has downgraded security at the British High Commission. This is in New Delhi. Additional security barricades outside the British High Commission have been removed. So London got a taste of its own medicine. It promises to ensure the safety of Indians, but local politics gets the better of them. Two British Sikh MPs have been fanning tensions, apparently. These are Tanmanjeet Singh and Preet Kaur Gill, both from the Labour Party, the opposition party in the UK right now. They've been accused of exaggerating the events in Punjab and raising concerns about the safety of Sikhs. This is about the police action against Amritpal Singh. He's the latest figurehead of the Khalistan movement. He's linked to Pakistan, he's armed and dangerous, and he's on the run in India. The police have launched a manhunt. The Indian High Commissioner in London tried to set the record straight for Sikhs in the UK.
Let me assure all our friends here in the UK, especially brothers and sisters with relatives in Punjab, that there is no truth to sensationalist lies being circulated on social media. The situation in your ancestral homeland is not what it is being reported. The elected chief minister of the state and the local police authorities have put out detailed information, including interviews on television. Please watch these. Do not believe the small handful of people putting out fiction and disinformation.
But tensions persist. Sooner or later, Amritpal will be captured. When that happens, the Khalistani supporters could up the ante again. They've always been violent secessionists. They take the law into their hands. And if they do it again, broken windows will be the last of India's problems. There's a security threat to Indian diplomatic staff and possibly to ordinary Indians based overseas as well. Today, there was another protest in San Francisco in the US. Khalistanis turned up at the Indian mission with flags. Thankfully, no violence has been reported so far. This is the second such protest in 4 days here. The last time they came, they chased the staff, broke windows and vandalized the building. So India asked for additional security, and the US heeded the Indian request. In fact, the Indian Consul General met with the local police earlier today. The consulate was barricaded. The San Francisco police were standing guard. And all of this is welcome, but it won't be enough. One, because this came after the attack, and two, they're still not going after the Khalistanis, their terror network and their funding. India must keep up the diplomatic pressure, push for more security of its diplomats and more accountability from Western governments on harboring anti-India groups. Our next story is about greed. The greed of big pharma, the unrelenting desire to maximize profits at the cost of human lives. The latest case in point is Moderna. It's an American pharma giant. It was in the headlines during the pandemic. It made a high-profile vaccine. The vaccine was given for free in the US. It was free for the people, but the US government paid for it. The government bought Moderna vaccines, which were then given free of cost to the people of America. You can imagine how big the government order was. It ran into millions. And now it's ending. The US government will not buy Moderna vaccines anymore, so the company will have to take it directly to the consumer. And Moderna likes the idea, because now it can set the price of the shot. Do you know how much they want to charge? $130 per dose. $130 for one injection. That's more than 10,500 rupees for one dose. And that's not even the most shocking part of it. Moderna is jacking up the price by 400%. The US government paid $26 for one shot. Moderna now wants Americans to pay $130. It's outrageous. How do they justify the new pricing? Listen to this.
So the price is not linked to the company's performance. The price is linked to the value of a product, to the patient, and to the impact on the patient. That's how we set price.
Let's revisit that statement. The price is linked to the value of a product, to the patient, and the impact on the patient. Well, by that logic, the greater the value of a drug for a patient, the greater should be its price. That's what happens when you treat life-saving medicines as mere commercial products. And Big Pharma is notorious for this. The Moderna CEO says he has made up his mind. He was called before a committee of American lawmakers. Look at the exchange.
My question to you is, given the fact that you have made billions of dollars, that your company has made huge profits, on behalf of the taxpayers of this country, will you reconsider your decision to quadruple the price of the vaccine?
The volume we had during the pandemic gave us economies of scale we won't have anymore. That is what is different.
That's the defense. The numbers are no longer adding up, he says. Well, let's look at the numbers then. How much does Moderna spend on making one dose of this vaccine? $2.85. That's it. That is the cost. And now they want to sell the same shot for $130. We understand that you want to cover the R&D costs, but this is a markup of more than 4,000%. This is loot, and you cannot justify it. Most businesses would be envious of profit margins like that. One US lawmaker says this is, quote-unquote, unacceptable corporate greed. His name is Bernie Sanders. He wrote a letter to the CEO of Moderna. I have a copy with me. This is what it says. Now, in the midst of a continuing public health crisis and growing federal deficit, is not the time for Moderna to be quadrupling the price of its vaccine. Now is not the time for unacceptable corporate greed. And he's right. The vaccine has already made billions for Moderna. In the last 2 years, Moderna has earned $18 billion in profits. Where did this money come from? From its Wuhan virus vaccine. Moderna's investors have become multi-billionaires. Meet Noubar Afeyan. He's Moderna's chairman and co-founder. He's worth $1.7 billion now. Robert Langer, another co-founder of the company. Again, he's worth $1.7 billion. Timothy Springer invested in Moderna. His net worth today is over $2 billion. And what about the CEO, Stéphane Bancel? His net worth is well over $4 billion. Moderna and its top management made a killing from this pandemic. And this was no coincidence. This was by design. For the longest time, Moderna has supplied its shots almost exclusively to rich countries, to countries which could pay a premium. They're the ones that got the vaccine. And Moderna did this more than any other vaccine manufacturer. I have some numbers. In October 2021, Moderna supplied just 1 million doses to poor countries. The company made a shift only a few months ago. In October 2022, it decided to supply 100 million doses to lower-income countries. And the vaccines are expected to reach these countries later this year. The story doesn't even scratch the surface of how big pharma holds the world hostage. Moderna's 400% price hike is just one glittering example. We'll dig out the rest some other time. And now a story from Jammu and Kashmir, a story of India reclaiming its heritage and traditions. India lost a lot during the partition. Today we'll talk about what the native residents of Kashmir, the Kashmiri Pandits, lost. They lost the Sharda Shakti Peeth, which now lies in ruins in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. This was once a magnificent site of worship and learning. And this wasn't just a loss for Kashmiri Pandits. This was a big loss for India's civilization. The Pandits have had a long-standing demand. They've been asking for access to the Sharda Peeth in POK. Repeated requests have fallen on deaf ears. But now there's a glimmer of hope. The government of India is looking to open a Kartarpur-like corridor to connect the Sharda Peeth in POK with Kashmir. But this comes with a host of challenges. Also an opportunity for both India and Pakistan. Our next report tells you more.
This is the Sharda Shakti Peeth, a 5,000-year-old temple, one of the most important sites of pilgrimage for Kashmiri Pandits. Today, it lies in ruins, barely 10 kilometers from the line of control between India and Pakistan. Until 1947, an annual pilgrimage was organized to the temple. Then, partition happened. Indians lost access to this seat of knowledge, and no earnest attempt was made to revive the pilgrimage. All of that may change now. This week, a temple dedicated to the goddess Sharda was inaugurated by India's Home Minister Amit Shah. It's located on the banks of the Kishan Ganga River in Kashmir's Kupwara district. India is also working on a pilgrimage corridor, one that connects Indian Kashmir with Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. The Home Minister said the government is committed to this, and that the new temple is the beginning of an era, a step towards the rediscovery of the Sharda civilization and the Sharda script. The temple in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir is dedicated to the goddess Saraswati, the Hindu goddess of learning and knowledge. Near the temple are the ruins of one of the world's oldest universities. They're believed to have had their own script called Sharda, more than 5,000 scholars, and the biggest library of their times. It ranked among ancient learning centers like Takshila and Nalanda, and now some of its lost glory may be revived. India is planning to build a passage along the lines of the Kartarpur corridor. The Kartarpur corridor connects Gurdwara Dera Baba Nanak in India to Gurdwara Darbar Sahib in Pakistan. It was the final resting place of Guru Nanak, the founder of the Sikh. These two centers of pilgrimage in India and Pakistan are linked by a corridor. Devotees no longer have to apply for a visa to visit the shrine in Pakistan. New Delhi wants a similar corridor for Sharda Peeth in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. This has been a long-standing demand of Kashmiri Pandits. As of today, visitors and pilgrims need an NOC or no objection certificate, and even that is no guarantee of access. Many devotees are routinely turned away by the Pakistani side. A corridor would help, but building it won't be easy. It will involve engaging with Pakistan. And while Kartarpur was in Punjab, this is Kashmir we're talking about. The line of control in Kashmir tends to be volatile. And unlike Kartarpur Sahib, which is just about 4.7 kilometers from the border, the Sharda Peeth is 10 kilometers away from the LOC. So, a corridor linking Sharda Peeth with Indian Kashmir will require double the manning that the Kartarpur corridor does. Also, Pakistan is unlikely to agree to such a corridor without getting something in return. If you didn't already know, only Indian devotees can travel to Gurdwara Darbar Sahib in Pakistan without a visa. The corridor does not allow Pakistanis to travel to Dera Baba Nanak in India. With Sharda Peeth, Pakistan is likely to push for its own citizens to be allowed entry into India to visit the Hazrat Bal shrine in Srinagar. An influx of Pakistani tourists could pose a major security risk for India. So, a lot depends on whether India can clinch a Kartarpur-like deal with Pakistan.
Our next story is about former US President Donald Trump. He's been arrested. It's an unprecedented turn of events, and the visuals are shocking. Look at these images. But when did Trump get 3 legs? And why does the police officer's badge show garbled text? That's because none of these images is real. They are artificial intelligence or AI-generated deep fakes, and Donald Trump has not been arrested yet. I know it's all very confusing, so let's unravel what happened here. Let's start with a man named Eliot Higgins. He's the founder of an open-source investigative agency. He wanted to visualize Trump's expected indictment, the one that could happen this week. Trump could be potentially charged with falsifying business records. This is in connection with hush money payments during his 2016 presidential campaign. If charged, he'll be the first former US president to face a criminal charge. Now, Higgins wanted to visualize all of this. So he turned to an AI art generator. He gave the software simple prompts like Donald Trump falling down while being arrested. And this is what he got. These deep fake images that you see, Higgins called it just mucking about. He shared the images on Twitter and thought, and I'm quoting, some 5 people would retweet it. 2 days later, about 5 million people have viewed these images. In other words, they've gone viral. This is how sophisticated AI-generated deepfakes are. They can seem so convincing, and they're only getting better. What is a deepfake? It's a technology to make images, videos, or audio, basically to create fake events. Hence the name deepfake. It uses a form of AI tech called deep learning. Academics and governments have been using it for years. Now amateurs are dabbling in it too. And you don't need special skills for it. There are softwares available on the internet, and they're apparently quite easy to use. They're being used to create all kinds of fakes. Putting words in a politician's mouth, making someone dance like a pro, making Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg brag about having, and I'm quoting, total control of billions of people's stolen data. It was a fake.
One man with total control of billions of people's stolen data
and making Barack Obama abuse Donald Trump. More recently, a deepfake showing Bill Gates talking about the Wuhan virus. If you got it on your phone, do know that it was a fake. And that's the scary part. We fall for them. They look so real, but they can be dangerous, especially to volatile news environments and governments. They're being used to harass, intimidate, and demean people. So far, they've not been able to cause major damage because governments have reliable security imaging systems in place. But the technology is developing, and it can do a lot more, like changing stock prices. They've already done that. Also, they can influence voters and provoke religious tension. But there's something even more insidious at play here. Deepfake is creating a zero-trust society, overwhelmed by fake news, where people give up on differentiating between reality and lies. It all looks the same. So what is the solution? Social media platforms have to reevaluate their approach. Guardrails have to be put in place. And what about governments? Well, they have to win this tech race. For any legislation to have teeth, the detection systems have to be upgraded. They have to be better than the creators. And ironically, AI may be able to help here. It's difficult for us mere humans to spot fake content, but AI can. Thankfully, deepfakes are not always malicious. They can also be entertaining, like when famous painter Dali took selfies with museum visitors. They can also be helpful, like voice cloning that restores people's voices and improves dubbing in foreign language films. In one case last year, the Dutch police revived a cold case from 2003. They created a digital avatar of the murder victim. So the balance between the good and evil of deepfake can be perplexing. But it seeks urgent action because deepfake has become the reality of our times. In Canada, the population is growing at breakneck pace. You must have followed news of a population crisis hitting several countries. South Korea and Japan are the worst hit. China is getting in that club too. But Canada is defying the trend. Its population increased by over 1 million people last year alone. It's not like Canadians are having more babies. That's far from it. Canada's population growth is being driven by immigrants. Because the government is actively encouraging immigration, it is setting higher targets for itself. And this could prove to be a double-edged sword. Our next report explains.
The Canada that we know of today is essentially a country of immigrants, colonizers to be precise. Before the arrival of European colonizers, Canada had a population of about 500,000 indigenous people. But European colonialism brought about a drastic change in Canada. The indigenous population fell from anywhere between 40 to 80%. Today, another wave of immigration is leading to a spike in Canada's population. This is part of the Canadian government's plan to increase the population. Last year, Canada's population grew by 2.7%. This is the fastest population expansion among advanced economies and puts Canada at par with many African nations. The country's population rose by over 1 million people, the highest ever recorded rise in the country's history. Canada now stands on the cusp of having a population of 40 million people. According to Statistics Canada, if the current trends hold, its population will double in the next 26 years. People from around the world are rushing to Canada. It's the lure of living in a developed Western nation, greener pastures, as they say. International migration accounted for 95.9% of the country's population growth last year. And some countries stood out, countries like India, China, and Afghanistan. Indians made up 27% of the total immigrants that Canada took in last year. The Chinese were a distant second, making up 7.2%. Then came the Afghans at 5.4%. The growth in Canada's population comes at a time when its government has made immigration a priority. And while most governments would like to curb the number of immigrants they take in, Canada is doing quite the opposite. It's encouraging immigration, and how? The Canadian government wants to be able to process and accept 500,000 immigration applications every year by 2025. So immigrants actually have the government of Canada standing behind them. Why is that? Canada faces a host of challenges. This includes high job vacancies and labour shortages. And Canada's existing population is aging fast. Unemployment is at a near record low, which means there's a strong demand for jobs. Labour shortages can be a critical threat to any country's economy. And Canada wants to avoid that threat by a mile. But that doesn't mean all is well, even now. In the last quarter of 2022, Canada's economy stalled and recorded no growth. That was described as a massive underperformance, one which nobody saw coming. There's a reason why many countries have tough immigration rules. Rampant immigration can change a country forever. It has the potential to alter the makeup of a nation's society. But from a more economic point of view, rising population alone can put governments in a tricky position. An influx of immigrants can create challenges in many sectors. Canada must make sure there are houses for the new immigrants, that they have access to healthcare, and that the country's infrastructure can support a rampantly rising population. There's not much Canada is doing on these fronts, but the population is rising, and it's rising fast. But the million-dollar question is, will the population boost lead to an economic boom?
Our last story today is about a beloved storybook bear, Winnie the Pooh. Once upon a time, the biggest problem in his life was shortage of honey jars. But those days are long gone. His biggest hurdle now is China's censorship. We're talking about a new horror film. Winnie the Pooh gets a sinister twist. It's called Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, but the only one it has managed to scare is the government of China. The film was supposed to be released in Hong Kong this week in over 30 cinemas, but suddenly something happened. Cinema chains began pulling out one by one, and suddenly all of them had cancelled the screening. The film distributor apologized for the inconvenience but did not give a reason. Meanwhile, the film's director claimed the decision had nothing to do with the movie itself. There was no technical issue. He pointed to political reasons. Now remember, Hong Kong is a semi-autonomous Chinese territory. And unlike Pooh, China continues to play a sinister role here. And you know China's relationship with this bear. It has always hit Beijing's nerve. You may ask why. Why is a cartoon bear such a touchy subject for Beijing? All because of a meme and the memes that followed. Look at this. These images show Pooh's resemblance to Chinese leader Xi Jinping. And other characters from the cartoon also make an appearance. In 2013, when Xi visited the US, this image made the rounds. It shows then US President Barack Obama walking next to him. Portly Winnie is being compared to Xi, while lanky Tigger is Obama. Here's another example from 2014. In this case, it was Japan's then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe standing next to Xi. Abe has been compared to a gloomy-looking Eeyore, while Xi is Pooh with his eyes closed. And these memes did the deed. Critics the world over started comparing Xi with Pooh. The bear turned into a political symbol. It even featured in China's COVID lockdown protests. They used him to mock the Chinese president. They used humor to call out serious issues. But Xi Jinping does not find it funny. His government banned the 2018 Christopher Robin film. Chinese censors continue to clamp down on Pooh references. They scrub images and comments about the bear. These actions, along with a ban on this horror film, only reiterated concerns. Hong Kong's freedom is shrinking. China is silencing pro-democracy dissidents. It imposed a national security law following the massive protests of 2019. In 2021, a film censorship law was passed in Hong Kong. It bans movies that could be a threat to national security. The law officially targets subversion, secession, and terrorism. But it's been used to wipe out political opposition. Last year, 2 films were dropped from Hong Kong's International Film Festival. It has also impacted Hong Kong's cinema culture. It produced 234 films in 1993 alone. But last year, the number dropped to 24, and now it seems Winnie the Pooh is the latest national security threat for China. There's no official reason on why the film was removed. Perhaps another example of China's censorship. Perhaps an act of self-censorship, with theatres constantly under pressure to comply with China's norms. Whatever be the case, people are upset. They're challenging the decision with more humor. Some are calling China's censorship scarier than the horror film it banned. Others are saying it's a shame they won't be able to catch Xi on the big screen. It's ironic that a global power is scared of a cartoon character. But true as that may be, for now, the honey-loving Pooh is stuck in a sticky situation in China. And finally, it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. A sandstorm is blinding China's capital. It has engulfed Beijing, shrouding buildings and roads with dust. Meanwhile, California is braving its latest bout of harsh, wintry weather. A tornado is ripping through it, sending debris flying and killing at least 5 people. In Lebanon, tear gas was fired as police clashed with protesters in Beirut. The unrest comes amid growing anger over the country's economic crisis. And lastly, images from history. Today, we take you to 1999, when for the first time in its history, NATO attacked a sovereign country. It was led by the US. Warplanes began a bombing campaign against Serbian military targets in former Yugoslavia. We leave you with these images. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Point. I want to make sure everybody's here.
Right.
Mismanaged vaccination drive, broken healthcare systems, citizens taking matters into their own hands. India's failure in managing the COVID-19 crisis is staggering.
Want stories but without the West spin on it? Presenting Vantage with me, Palki Sharma, a first-of-its-kind global show with an Indian perspective.
An Indian becoming a UK PM.
Well, it's not like that we are going to get the Kohinoor back. But at least India is on its way to the top, huh?
But Gautam sir, there's actually not much to celebrate.
Why not? An Indian is ruling the UK.
Indian leaders in third countries often tend to overcompensate for their minority handicap.
Key.
For example, Sunak's Home Secretary of Indian origin, Suella Braverman, disapproved of India-UK free trade because it would encourage people immigrating to the UK, and the majority of whom were Indians. Structurally, India and UK have passed baggage, but still hasn't been resolved. And that is why...
Ladies and gentlemen, India needs to significantly temper its expectations from Rishi Sunak. Presenting Vantage with me, Palki Sharma, a first-of-its-kind global show with an Indian perspective.